Hello, everyone. I'm going to do a Patreon shout out, but don't click past it because there's something really important I'm going to add into this. But for now, I'm going to say thank you to Vandalia for joining my Patreon campaign. Thank you very much for the support and to help keep the channel going. I've made some changes to my Patreon. Now, when you sign up to it, you pay right away instead of waiting until the 1st. That way, not only do you get your rewards immediately, like getting your shout out, as soon as possible, but also it means that you can decide when you pay up the Patreon fee every single month. So if you want to do it to time out with your paycheck, you can do that now. So I feel like that's a far more convenient thing for everybody all around. Also, because my Discord is now set to private, I have lowered the access level to get into it. Patreon now lets you into my Discord at the $2 level. So if you want to get in, talk to the community and all that, that's how to do it now. So that's my little shout out announcement thing. Thank you, everyone. And again, thank you to Vandalia. I appreciate it very much. All right. I guess, as always, you can check the description for the Patreon link if you want to join and help support and keep the channel alive. All right. Moving on. We have a topic to talk about today because this has been a surprisingly big year for the return of the Pretenders. So, as Legacy did its Wave 1 core class, everyone was kind of shocked to find Iguanus on the list, an actual Pretender character. I think at some point we were even convinced this would be the Beast Wars Iguanus. No, they're not going to do a Pretender, are they? And then they did, and they did it in this really fascinating way, where we have the outer shell as the main robot and the inner robot's vehicle mode made out of it. And at a simple core class, that actually kind of works. But there's been a lot of debate lately over Pretenders, their place in modern Transformers, and how Hasbro has been going about them. And I kind of wanted to go over that today. So, for the youngins who don't know what a Pretender is, here is a classic example of one. Pretenders was one of the last ideas they had in Generation 1 to try and keep the brand going. The idea was you got an action figure of some kind of futuristic guy. If you were an Autobot, it was usually like a Space Marine. If you were a Decepticon, it was usually a monster of some kind. Either way, you would open up the shell, and inside there would be this skinny little robot that you could take out, and it functioned as a normal Transformer. The idea was to get two action figures in one, and to be able to store one inside the other. The concept was novel, and they tried to expand it as most as they could. There were Pretenders that had vehicle shells, that had animal shells. There were Pretenders with transforming shells or could combine with their shell in some way. There were Pretenders that had like a whole load of different shells inside shells going on. They really tried every angle they could to make this work. The fact of the matter is, though, Pretenders were never exciting toys. The inner robots just never looked as cool as the old characters did. And when you had them inside the shell, you basically just had the exact same toy that you had when he was out of the shell. So why would you ever keep one in the shell if, because then, why would you ever lower yourself to one action figure? It was a weird concept. And it was not enough to save the Transformer brand, unfortunately. We know that story. The story that comes afterwards is how to reinvent those characters, because thanks to the Marvel comics, the Pretenders did have something of a role in the Transformers fiction, with one exception, Bludgeon, being particularly noticeable as one of the Decepticon leaders. And obvious to see why. Bludgeon was always a cool design. Now, this was one of the first attempts ever to do a modern Pretender character, and I've never been happy with this design. To me, this always felt like the aesthetic was confused. This was around the time of animated starting to come out. This was post Revenge of the Fallen. Yeah, he's got a lot of skeletal details in there, like a lot of those toys did, but he's got some really smooth, kind of cartoonish elements to him too. There's some solid bulk to him, like a Universe 2 toy. There's a lot of aesthetics going on here, like they couldn't figure out where they were going to release him, and I've never quite been happy with the look, though there are people that swear by this figure. It was just never me. And of course, it doesn't have any traditional Pretender function. For that, You had to wait all the way until Power of the Primes, where we got our replacement for the Prime Masters. Now, we admit, Prime Masters released on their own was just a way of selling spare heads for the kids that lost the head to their main toy. The vehicle/weapons that they came with were mostly just to give them enough function to pass as toys themselves. They're really just replacement parts. Now, when you fast forward to do that with the Power of the Primes gimmick, Matrix cores, you get a really lackluster turnout. Okay, they're just tiny little pretenders. They're, the 13 pretending to be, literally pretending to be pretenders. It just wasn't interesting enough. Like, it was actually kind of cool that they tried to work that in a little bit, but it more or less just kind of like made us wonder, like, why haven't they done real pretenders again? And I think more than anything, this was probably something of a test run for Hasbro, because this was like a low budget way of testing the water to see how fans and collectors would respond to getting completely new pretenders out on the shelves. So we have our modern day depictions as well. If we look at Skullgrin, who I did recently review on this channel, we have a modern solution at Deluxe Class where he does have a lot of elements from his shell, but he mostly looks like a bulked out version of his inner robot, and he has a tank mode very loosely based on his original. It really doesn't. The original had a much sleeker tank mode and didn't just look like this weird half hover, half track thing. It didn't look like a gray brick, I'll say that. So we're all just kind of lost. Like, what do you do to create a modern pretender that actually makes it feel like a current pretender? How do you modernize the idea? All right, so I had two ideas behind this, and fortunately, I don't have to sketch them out or anything, or work in graphic design in order to create some kind of example. I can cite other toys to show you exactly what I would do for something like this. So let's take an example like Bomb Burst here. Now, Bomb Burst does have a recent toy. Stay tuned. The review's filmed. You'll see it soon. But the toy itself, I don't think, it kind of has the same issues where, like, what they were trying to do kind of hurt it overall. And when we kind of want the way the pretenders function, but we want it modernized. So here's what I'm thinking here. So with a toy like this, where the inner robot kind of matches the outer shell, you have room to do something a little bit more contemporary when it comes to this with attachable armor. Instead of having just one big pretender shell, you have individual components that you can attach onto him. Now, there were trans-scanning figures for the first movie that tried to do something akin to this. They were terrible. We're not going to talk about them. But there are other examples that give you what I mean. So when it comes to Hasbro, they're going to take the cheapest route as possible. So if they were to do it this way, then what you're looking at is a base figure that looks like the original Pretender robot, maybe a little bit, better proportions, so there's space for things to clip into. And you would be attaching armor onto it. So like your chest would be like a hollow shell that you'd press onto the robot and it'd lock into place. Do the same thing with the pelvis, the thigh pieces, the boots, the forearms, the biceps, the shoulders. Tons of little parts that all combine onto this skinny little robot in order to form like a full pretender that still has a full range of articulation, because those gaps in the armor are going to be using the articulation from the inner robot. That's why it works for a design like this, where the inner robot's colors match the outer shell. Fortunately, for those having a hard time envisioning this, we do have a few examples to kind of give you an idea of where my head is going. One would be the old Ronin Warrior figures. This is what I feel like Hasbro would do. Can you see how, like, the forearms and the shoulders and all that, it's all just attached and clipped on? So I would be thinking something similar to that. However, there needs to be something. It can't just be armor, right? It can't be bits of armor that's thrown together, right? You got to figure out something else. It's got to have some transformation to it. Now, we today have weaponizers, we have modulators, we have fossilizers, we have the new Junkions coming out to show that there's a lot you can do with creating a vehicle mode out of a whole bunch of loose parts. And that's exactly what I would do here. I would design it so that all these armor components could come together into some kind of working thing, either a beast that would accompany the robot or a full vehicle that the robot could actually sit down in and pilot. You know, when you're dealing with something like bomb bursts, like, join with me your imagination here. So the boots themselves would be solid pieces all the way around. You just like stick the leg into it and lock in. So if you flip those feet down and combine them together back to back, well, now you got a nose cone, right? Okay, so we've got these big shell pieces. I'll attach like the big torso shell to the bottom of this. I'll put the pelvis shell behind it. That forms your cockpit seat that the robot can sit in. And then you've got the wings from Bomb Burst's robot mode, shell mode. So those become the wings of the vehicle. And you just start doing things like that in order to kind of piece all of this together. Fortunately, as I'm explaining things, again, we have visual examples that work elsewhere. For starters, this isn't something that Hasbro and Takara are not already familiar with. They did something similar like this for their Micromaster combiners, where all the loose parts could form into something that a Micromaster could ride in. Granted, it's not going to be quite as much physical space as, depends on the size of the core robot, I guess. But, here's a precedent. You want another precedent? I'll show you the toy that did it better than anyone else. And that would be King Gridman. Or I believe it was Formo in Superhuman Samurai Cyber Squad. So imagine if that Gridman Sigma on the right is the inner robot, and on the left is what the shell all combines into. If you look at how they combine, it's basically what I'm talking about here. All of it combines with him as the inner robot, and then all of his articulation becomes the articulation of the shell mode. This is your blueprint for doing a modern Pretender right here. This is basically accomplishing that. Now, to make this work, you'd have to be somewhere along the lines of like a Voyager class toy or something like that at the very least. But I think that would sell. I think that would work really well. You go from having the two action figure concept to having a robot and a vehicle that still has some functionality. In doing research for this video, I actually stumbled upon something I'd never heard of before that actually does exactly what I'm talking about. And for that, I'm going to show you this thing. So this one is literally a toy line out of Korea called Armored Saurus. This is a Raptor that does come with this big vehicle unit that is Raptor-esque. And in the way the toy functions, the way this whole toy line functions, that vehicle comes apart and forms the armor of the Raptor. And there's a piloted like drone vehicle in there too, but for the most part, yes, you're getting a robot Raptor out of this. Herein lies exactly what I would like to see. This for me works, and hey, this could be a way of doing the beast pretenders like Chainclaw and Catilla. Like, this could be a way of doing even that. So now, there is a problem with this concept, and it is that in order to do this, I need to leave some of that original robot exposed in the elbows and the knees and all that in order to make this actually function and look right. And sometimes that's not quite possible. So let's go back to Bludgeon and the original and the original mold, and then we find, we need to do the most popular of all the pretenders, right? So how do we do this when he's like green and maroon in his inner robot mode and bright orange in samurai mode? So there's another way that this can be done. And if we're going to be doing modern pretenders at Voyager class, this is what I would call a leader class version. So the inner robot would mostly stay the same. However, there would be a twist to this one. And luckily, I don't have to go outside of Hasbro and Takara this time to show you exactly how it would work, because we've done this before. Hello. So, in the case of Bludgeon, in the case of any pretender that has a radically different color scheme in the inner robot than the outer shell, your strangleholds, for instance, I would do something like this, where the inner robot formed a core that would connect into what is essentially one solid body that had its own transformation system and could form a big vehicle for that inner robot to either attach onto and become like a super tank or a super jet or whatever in the case of Thunderwing, or to just like make it easier, like make it something it could pilot. So the gimmick stays the same throughout, except now we're dealing with something like this where a lot of it's already attached and you're not putting a whole lot of like the outer robot, the inner robot exposed into the outer shell. This is mostly just forming the component that holds the whole thing together. You do make it essential to the transformation, like the arms connect to it or something once it forms up. However, something I'd like to see, and something I would love to see all of these pretenders do, no matter what size they are or how the system functions, I would love for the shell head, the outer shell's head, to come out of the robot, like a torso that opens up and it flips out. Because one element that I really never liked about the old Pretenders is that there's no element of the inner robot in the outer one. If you lose the inner robot, the shell is still a perfectly functioning action figure, which is something of a plus, but it does mean it's detached from the entire experience. This is a way of reintegrating it a little bit more and to make both parts essential to each other, to make it feel more like you're doing a complete thing with these. So maybe the Space Marine ones are redesigned to have fully mechanical heads and look more like Transformer in robot mode, because they wouldn't have like the removable head, they wouldn't have like removable helmets or anything to reveal human heads. They'd be sculpted to be like more robotic head. So I could see them just making it robotic so all the Pretenders could do something like this. That way we don't have like this, mentioning Stranglehold, like we don't have this like Burt Reynolds' head like flipping out of a modern Transformer. No, it'd be creepy, be weird. But I think you get my imagination here, right? So I think I've had enough visual examples to kind of drill this home. I feel like there's a way to make a modern Pretender work, and I feel like this is the way to go about it, both in things that Hasbro has only kind of touched on before and things they've already done. The tech and the engineering is already there. It's just a matter of Hasbro deciding to apply it to a Pretender concept. Takes a little bit of reimagining, and you're not going to have the two action figure at once thing, but let's be honest, that was never the cool part about Pretenders. It was super cool looking, like Space Marine Autobots and monstrous Decepticons and weird alt modes that kind of look like motorcycles and submarines, but don't. That part could be that part could be fixed up a lot with this concept. But I just want to get the idea out there. Let me know in the comments what you think. If you've got a better idea for how a modern Pretender could work, could you even make the shell work like it did originally and still make it engaging? Because you're going to lose a lot of that articulation somewhere one way or another. Might as well do something with it, right? Might as well make it do something else. So that's my idea. I hope you enjoyed. Just me spitballing an idea today. And if you like it, let me know, because I've always got other ideas. Because guess what? I'm one of those fans that thinks they know better than anyone at Hasbro how things should work. Kidding. But not in this case, no. I hope you enjoyed. I will see you next time. Guys, I am facing the most powerful enemy any YouTuber can face, the algorithm, and I need your help to defeat him. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and leave a comment. Every time you do, we attack that algorithm and we drive it back until it can no longer defeat this channel. Thank you very much.